everyone, this is Rosie, and today we're going to be sewing version 1 of David's Sling. So let's get started. Let's take a quick look at the bag. This is version 1 of David's Sling, which is made of 100% cotton quilting fabric on both the exterior and interior. I did design it to be a sling, but it can also be used as a hip bag. If you would like to sew along with me, I do have a link in the description below the video to where you can find the pattern. The bag has an outside zipper pocket which measures approximately 8 inches wide by 5 inches high, and the back of the bag at its widest point measures approximately 13.5 inches wide by 7 inches high. The front zipper pocket is large enough to hold my iPhone 12 in a case. If your cell phone is much larger than an iPhone 12, it may not fit. The main compartment has a double zipper closure, and there's a slip pocket and a pen holder inside. The slip pocket will also hold my iPhone 12 and a pen. And then if you want, you can carry a small notebook in the slip pocket as well. And there's plenty of room on the interior to hold whatever necessary essentials that you need to carry with you. Above the slip pocket, you will find a D-ring which holds a keychain strap, and the interior seams are finished with binding. So let's go ahead and take a look at our pattern pieces. To cut out all of your pattern pieces, you will need to refer to the cutting chart for version 1 of David's Sling, which you will find inside your PDF pattern. I do prefer to prefuse all of my fabrics with the woven interfacing before cutting out my pieces. This saves time because it eliminates the need to cut out your fabric and your interfacing separately. These pieces have been cut from my exterior main fabric, and the fabric was prefused with woven interfacing before cutting. This will be my exterior back, and I also cut out the corresponding piece of foam. Here are the 4 pieces for the strap connectors: my left gusset, my right gusset. These 2 pieces will be used for the top gusset, and this piece will be used for the bottom gusset. In addition to the woven interfacing, I've also applied the corresponding piece of fusible fleece to the pieces that you see here. So I have my left and right gussets, and I have applied the fusible fleece to each one of these pieces. Only 2 of the strap connectors will need fusible fleece, along with your top and bottom gusset pieces. These 2 pieces were cut from the exterior feature fabric. They will make up the front zipper pocket, and both pieces were prefused with the woven interfacing. Here are the pattern pieces cut from my lining fabrics, and again, these pieces were prefused with the woven interfacing, with the exception of one piece, which I will show you in a minute. These pieces will be used for the left gusset and the right gusset. I have the 2 pieces for my top gusset, and this piece will be used for the bottom gusset. This is my back left lining piece, and this is the right left lining piece. Then I have these 2 pieces here, which are piece B on your cutting chart. Only one of your B pieces will be interfaced with the woven interfacing. The second piece you will just leave without the interfacing. And then I also cut out the piece of foam that we will sew in later. Next, we have a few of our lining pieces that will not be interfaced with the woven interfacing. First, we have these 2 pieces here, which will be the lining for the front zipper pocket. Then we have the keychain strap and the D-ring tab. And last, I have my binding pieces that I've cut out. You will follow the directions within the PDF file for cutting out your strips, and you do not want to interface these with woven interfacing. This piece has been cut from my lining contrast fabric. It is interfaced with the woven interfacing, and it will be used for the pocket in the center back lining. For my notions, I have my 1-inch wide buckle and strap slider. I have my nylon webbing, which is 1 inch wide, 2 D-rings, along with 1 swivel clip, and all of these pieces here are 3/4 of an inch wide. From my number 4.5 continuous zipper, I've prepared 2 separate zippers. The zipper tape here is 1.25 inches wide, and it does need to be a zipper that is 1.25 inches wide for this project. On one of the zippers, you're going to install 2 zipper pulls that are head to head, and on the second zipper you will be installing one zipper pull. To pre-fuse your fabrics with the woven interfacing, you want to refer to your fabric layout charts. You have one of these charts for each fabric that you will be cutting out. This chart here is for my exterior feature fabric, and this is using a fat quarter of fabric. You're going to see on the fabric that there's a red box. That red box signifies the area that you need to pre-fuse with the woven interfacing. And if you look down here, it tells you how big you need to cut that piece out. So here I need to cut out a piece of my woven interfacing that's 10 inches wide by 7 inches high. Here I have a fat quarter of fabric. And I'm going to open it up so that the wrong side is facing up. And here is the piece of interfacing that I cut out, which is the size given to me on the chart, and I have fused it to the wrong side of my fabric. After fusing it in place, I traced out the 2 pattern pieces that I need to cut out. Then you can go ahead and pre-fuse all of your fabrics using the information on the layout charts. In this step, we will be sewing the upper gusset. You need your 2 exterior upper gusset pieces along with the lining pieces, and you need the zipper that has the 2 zipper pulls on it. The first thing that you're going to do is mark the center of each one of these pieces. So you want to turn them wrong side facing up. And the same for the zipper, you want it to be wrong side facing up. And go ahead and place a mark at the center of each piece, including your zipper. I've already marked mine, and there are 2 ways that you can do this. You can simply fold it in half and place your markings that way, or you can use the center markings on your pattern pieces. For now, we're just going to be working with the exterior pieces. With the zipper facing right side up, placing a piece of double-sided adhesive tape that's 1/8 inch wide all along the edge of the zipper. The tape will be within your seam allowance, so you don't have to worry about this scumming up your needle when you're sewing. And flip it over and do the same thing on the other side. And the tape is optional. After you have the tape in place, just burnish it down really well. And then we're going to remove the release paper on one side of the tape. Then I'm going to take the upper section of my top gusset, and I want to match up the center point of the gusset with the center point of the zipper. I'll put a little pin back here where my center point is just to help you see it a little bit better. Just line them up and then stick the gusset down onto the zipper. After you have that adhered in place, you're going to take the lining section of the top gusset and we're going to clip it to the other side. I don't use tape on the lining side, I only use it on the exterior side. And when you're done clipping, you just want to go ahead and make sure that the side edges of both your exterior and your lining pieces are even with each other. Once everything looks good, we can sew straight across with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm sewing on a Juki DX 4000 QVP, which is also known as the Kokochi. My stitch length is 2.6 and my seam allowance is going to be 1/4 inch, and you do want to backstitch at each end. I also have my zipper foot installed. I have my 2 zipper pulls at this end. I'm just going to move them out of the way. And then I'll finish off till the end of the seam. And backstitch. After sewing the exterior and lining pieces to your zipper, you want to press both of them up and away from the zipper, which I've already done off camera. Now we can go ahead and sew in the lower portion of our gusset. First thing that I'm going to do is remove the release paper. And I'm going to put in another pin at the center mark of my zipper, just to help you see it better. Then I'm going to take the lower section and line up the center points and adhere it down to the zipper. And after I secure that in place, I'll take my lining side and I'm going to clip it to the wrong side of the zipper. After you have everything clipped together, check the side edges of your lining and your exterior, make sure that they're even with each other, and then we can sew straight across with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm ready to sew in the lower gusset, and again the seam allowance is 1/4 inch and the stitch length is 2.6, and make sure that you backstitch at both ends. I want to move my zipper pulls out of the way. After sewing in the exterior and lining side of the lower gusset to the zipper, press both of those pieces away from the zipper. Then we're going to top stitch 1/8 inch away from each side of the zipper. And then the last thing that we'll do for this piece is baste all the way around the perimeter. And before I do that, I'll just put a few clips in to hold all of my pieces in place. I'm ready to top stitch 1/8 inch away from each side of the zipper. I will be using a stitch length of 3.0 and I'm going to back stitch at each end. Now I just want to baste all the edges together. I'll baste 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and I'll still use the same stitch length of 3.0. And there's no need to backstitch here. Also, I just want to point out that this is a nylon zipper. My machine will be able to sew over this zipper teeth, over these zipper teeth, but you never, ever, ever want to sew over metal zipper teeth with a sewing machine. In this step, we will sew the left and right gusset pieces to the top gusset. Start by trimming off the excess zipper on each side, just like this. If you take a look at your left and right gusset pieces along the outer edge, you're going to notice that you have a straight edge that goes into a curved edge. The straight edge indicates the top of the gusset. So this top edge of the gusset will be clipped to our top gusset, and this bottom edge of the gusset will be clipped to our bottom gusset. We'll start by clipping the left gusset to the top gusset. You're going to place the exteriors right sides together, and I want you to notice that I've drawn my seam line here that's 3/8 of an inch away from the edge. You'll start by lining up the points at the bottom of the top gusset and put a clip in place. And I want you to notice here where the line ends, it's hitting right at the edge of the top gusset. So that's how you want this to be aligned. You need this line to be hitting right on the edge of the top gusset here. And you'll put in a few clips. Here's a closer look. Where this line ends, the top of that line should be hitting the edge of the top gusset, right here at this point. Now we will clip the lining gusset to the opposite side of the exterior gusset. So we'll just turn this over, and we're going to clip it in exactly the same way. You'll start with the point at the bottom, clip them together, and now you want the straight edge of the lining to be even with the straight edge of the exterior gusset piece. So clip them together, and after you have everything clipped into place, we're going to sew straight across with a 3/8 inch seam. I'm sewing the left gusset to the top gusset with a stitch length of 2.6 and a seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch, and you do want to backstitch at both ends. Now we can clip the right gusset in place, and we'll do this exactly the same way that we did for the left gusset. Right sides together, match up the bottom point, make sure that the top of the line is even with the top edge of the top gusset, and then clip the rest of the length in place. And we can turn it over and clip the lining side in place. So match up the bottom points. The edge of the lining gusset should be even with the edge of the exterior gusset. So line it all up. clip in place. And when you're done clipping, we can go ahead and sew this with a 3/8 inch seam, exactly the same way we did for the left gusset. Again, I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.6 and a seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch, and make sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. After the left and right gussets are sewn into place, you're going to press them away from the top gusset on both sides. And then we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam on both sides. I'm top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line with a stitch length of 3.0, and your top stitching will actually be on top of the left and right gusset pieces. And again, you do want to back stitch. And then you can flip it around and top stitch the opposite side in exactly the same way. In this step, we're going to sew the bottom gusset to our left and right gusset pieces. The first thing that you need to do is push the lining side of the left and right gusset out of the way. Then you'll take the bottom gusset and place it right sides together with the top gusset. You have this point here. You want the point of the bottom and the left gusset to line up. And then here on the bottom gusset you have this straight edge. You want that to be even with the side of the left gusset. Then you just go ahead and clip everything in place. And then we'll do the same thing on this side. You're going to make sure that that lining is out of your way. You're going to line up the point at the bottom. Clip it in place, and that straight edge needs to be even with the side of the right gusset. And after you have those two sides clipped into place, you're going to sew each one of these sides with a 3/8 inch seam. I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.6 and my seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, and you do want to back stitch at both ends. And when you're done with that first seam, you can go ahead and flip around to the other side, and then you'll stitch this second side in exactly the same way. Here we have the exterior bottom gusset sewn into place, and now we're ready to sew in the lining bottom gusset. So you'll do the same exact thing. You're going to take the bottom gusset, line it up with each side gusset, making sure that the points match up. And the straight edge on the lining gusset should be even with the edge of the side gusset. And same thing on this side. Right sides together, match up your points. And then you'll sew each side with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, just like we did for the exterior. I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.6 and my seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, and again you always want to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Then you can flip the piece over and sew the other side in exactly the same way. On the exterior side of the gusset, you want to press the seams of the bottom gusset open, and then you'll do the same thing on the lining side. So here's the lining side. You want to press the seams open on the bottom gusset. With your gusset facing right side out, top stitch on each side of that bottom gusset seam. And we will be top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from each side of the seam. Then you'll go ahead and do the same thing on this side. And when you do your top stitching, we're only top stitching through the exterior side. We will not be top stitching on the lining side. I'm top stitching 1/8 of an inch away from each side of the bottom gusset seam. Make sure that your seam has been pressed open flat and that your lining piece right here is out of the way. And I'm using a stitch length of 3.0, and I will back stitch at the beginning and the end. Then I'll move over to the other side of the seam and top stitch in the same way. Then you can scoot over to the other side of the gusset and begin your top stitching. Again, make sure that that seam is opened and pressed flat and that your lining is out of the way. In this step, we will be sewing the exterior and lining sections of the gusset together. So you want to place your gusset so that the exterior and lining pieces are wrong sides together. And then we're going to clip all around the perimeter of the inner and outer gusset. Start by lining up the seams of your bottom gusset. So I will do that on both sides. Make sure that everything is nice and even. And then we'll do it on the outer section as well. So just line up those seams and put in a clip on each side. And then we can go ahead and clip all around the perimeter. And we've already stitched the lining and the exterior of the top gusset together, so we don't need to do that part. And then you'll do the same thing on the inner perimeter here. Make sure that all of your edges are nice and even. And then once you have everything clipped into place, we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of both the outer and inner perimeters. I'll start by sewing around the outer perimeter with a stitch length of 3.0, and I'm stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. There is no need to backstitch here. And now I can go ahead and sew the inner perimeter. In this step, we will prepare the binding for sewing into the gusset. Follow your written instructions for cutting out your bias strips and sewing them together. Next, you'll take the continuous strip of binding that you've created. You want to fold the binding in half so that wrong sides are together, and you want the two long edges to be even with each other, and then you'll press in place. Then from the continuous strip of binding, you're going to cut out two separate strips, and I've already cut mine out. The shorter strip will be used for the front of the gusset, and the longer strip will be used for the back of the gusset. Next, take both strips, going to temporarily open them up, and clip the short ends together with the right sides together. Sew the two ends together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a stitch length of 2.0, and I am going to sew mine off camera. Press both of the seams open and then refold your strips back in half with wrong sides together. In this step, we will sew the binding to the gusset. If you look at your gusset, you're going to notice that you have some dog ears on the front, right here and here, and then you also have some on the back, on this seam and on this seam here. We want to trim those off. And after trimming them off, we'll clip the binding in place. The binding will be clipped to the lining side of the gusset, so we'll turn the gusset with the lining side out. And I'll start with our shorter strip, which goes on the front of the gusset. So we're just going to clip this on all the way around and try and keep your edges nice and even. You want to be careful not to stretch out your binding because it is a bias binding and it will stretch. Now that we have that clipped into place, we'll take our larger ring of binding and clip that to the back of the gusset. And you'll do this the same way. Just be careful not to stretch the gusset. Just lay it in there nicely. And follow the contour of the gusset itself. You'll see that here there's a little dip in the gusset. You just want to follow that contour. Now that we have the binding clipped to the gusset on both the front and back, we can go ahead and sew it in place with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm starting by sewing the binding to the front of the gusset with a stitch length of 3.0 and a seam allowance of approximately 1/4 of an inch. You just want to go slow and try and keep the raw edge of the binding even with the edge of your gusset. And I am using the free arm on my sewing machine to do this. And now I can go ahead and sew the binding to the back of the gusset. In this step, we will be sewing the front zipper pocket. So you will need your exterior and lining pieces for the front zipper pocket along with the zipper. First thing that you want to do is turn your pieces wrong side up and mark all of your centers. I have them marked here already, and you also want to mark the center of your zipper. And just like before, the first thing that we're going to do is place a row of 1/8 inch double-sided tape to each side of that zipper on the right side of the zipper. Then burnish it down. I'll start by sewing the upper portion of the pocket into the zipper. But before I do, I want to check the placement of my zipper pull. I like my zipper pull to be to the left when it's closed. So if I move it this way, the zipper is opening, and if I move it this way, the zipper is closing. So it's in the right position. I'm going to remove the release paper, and I'm putting a pin where the center is once again. And now I can take the upper portion of my pocket and line that up with the center of the zipper. And then I'll just adhere that down. I want to make sure that the edges of the pocket and the edges of the zipper are even with each other. Then after that's in place, you'll take your lining piece and do exactly the same thing as we did for the gusset. Line up the center, make sure that your straight edges are even, and clip in place. Then you'll check to make sure that the side edges of both the exterior and the lining are even with each other on both sides. Once everything looks good, we can go ahead and sew straight across with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.6 and my seam allowance is 1/4 inch, and I do have my zipper foot attached. You want to backstitch at both ends. Now we can sew the bottom of the pocket into the opposite side of the zipper, and we'll do this in exactly the same way. We remove the release paper. I've already placed a pin in to mark the center of the zipper, and then I'll take my pocket and match up the center points. adhere it down. Make sure that those edges are even. We'll flip it over and take the lining portion, and that's being clipped to the wrong side of the zipper. Match up your center points and clip in place. After clipping, we can sew straight across with a 1/4 of an inch seam, just like we did for the top section. Before sewing, once again, make sure that your exterior and lining edges are even on the sides. Again, I'm sewing with a stitch length of 2.6 and my seam allowance is 1/4 of an inch. And do back stitch at both ends. Press your seams away from the zipper on both the exterior and lining sides. Then top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the zipper on both sides of the zipper. After top stitching, you want to baste your lining and exterior sides together, and before you do the basting, open up your zipper to the center of the pocket. I'm going to do this off camera. You're going to do it exactly the same way that you did for the top gusset, and I will use a stitch length of 3.0. Now trim away your excess zipper, and you'll do this just by following the contour of the pocket. Take your front zipper pocket template and you're going to see that there are some registration marks. There are 3 on top and 3 on the bottom, and they're indicated by these short red lines. To make marking my front pocket a little bit easier, I like to take the template and I just cut on each one of those lines. And then I fold back the little tab, which will give me a slit for marking. And you'll do that to all 6 registration marks. Take your template and line it up with your front pocket. Make sure that it's all nice and even on there. You can use the zipper placement to line it up with the position of your zipper. And then I like to put in a couple of clips just to hold it in place. And then using the slits that we cut out here, you just use a pen, an erasable marking tool, and mark all of those registration marks. In this step, we will sew in the front zipper pocket lining. You need your 2 B pieces, one of which has been interfaced with the woven interfacing, and the other one is just the plain fabric. Then you need your front zipper pocket that you just created, plus the corresponding piece of foam. Take your B piece that has the woven interfacing and place it wrong side up on your work surface and put a few pieces of double-sided adhesive tape onto the back of that piece. Then remove the release paper. Then take your piece of corresponding foam and lay it on top of the wrong side of that piece B. You want to have even spacing all the way around the foam. Then take your second piece B and layer it on top and secure the layers together with clips all the way around. Make sure that all of those edges are even. After clipping together, baste around the perimeter 1/8 of an inch from the edge with a stitch length of 3.0, and I will do that off camera. Now take your front zipper pocket lining that you created with the foam. I like to have the side with the woven facing down on my work surface. Then take your exterior pocket, lay it on top, line up all the edges, and clip together. After you have all of the layers clipped together, baste all around the perimeter, 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and I'm going to do that off camera with a stitch length of 3.0. Now that I have my layers sewn together, I want to put some pins in where I made those registration marks so that you can see it a little bit better on the camera. So your marking should be at the center of the top and the bottom of the pocket. Then you'll have one on the left side and the right side of the top, and the left side and the right side of the bottom. And just to make things a little bit easier for lining the pocket up with the front of the gusset, we're going to number each one of these markings. This one here will be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6. Next, we need to mark the center of the lower section of the top gusset and the center of the bottom gusset. You can do this by using your pattern piece or simply folding your pieces in half. I'm going to put a little clip to hold it in place. And then you can stretch out to the right, stretch out to the left, and where the fold is, you'll put a pin to mark your center. Or you can use an erasable marking tool. Now, just like we did for the pocket, we're going to number our registration marks. On the top gusset, the seam that's right here, this will be number 1, the center's number 2, this seam here is number 3, then we're going to flip it over. The seam line here is going to be number 4, the center of the bottom is number 5, and the seam here is number 6. In this step, we will sew the zipper pocket to the front of the gusset. Now remember that we numbered our registration points. I have the top of the gusset up here. This seam line is number 1, center is number 2, and this seam line is number 3. And that corresponds to this marking on the left side of the pocket, which is number 1, center is number 2, and the right side is number 3. We want to turn the gusset so that the lining side is facing out, and we want to take mark number 2 and line it up with mark number 2 on the gusset. Just like this. So we have those center points aligned, and I like to put a clip in on both sides. Now we want to take mark number 1 on the pocket and line it up with the seam line on the top of the gusset, which is mark number 1 on the gusset. And these need to go at an angle. So you want the seam line to be going in this direction at a diagonal. And when you get those lined up, you're going to put a clip in on each side. And then we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to take the seam line here, which is mark number 3, and line that up with mark number 3 on the pocket. So line it up, and I put a clip in on both sides. You want to make sure that all of your edges are even with each other. And then you'll go ahead and clip in between all of those registration marks. And just take your time with this. And same thing on this side. Just ease everything in there. It should fit in perfectly. This will be a close-up of showing how to clip together the points on the side with the side seams of the gusset. So I have my gusset right here, and here is the line. And then I have my pin, which is at an angle. I want the angle of that pin to line up with my side seam. And then I clip it on both sides. And then to show you on this side, here's the side seam of the gusset, and the angle of the pin needs to line up with the side seam of the gusset. So when you match up the pin with the side seam, they should be in a straight line with each other. And then clip it on both sides. Now we're going to turn it over so that the bottom of the pocket is facing up. And we're going to clip the right sides together. And now we're going to start with the center of the bottom, and the center of the bottom is right here, and that would be mark number 5. So number 5 on the pocket and number 5 on the gusset, line those up and clip into place. Now we'll go to this side. This would be mark number 4. You're going to line that up with the side seam of the bottom gusset, which is also mark number 4. So line those up and put a clip on each side. And then we're going to move this to this side. This will be mark number 6 on the pocket. That gets lined up with the side seam of the bottom gusset, which is also mark number 6. So go ahead and line those up and clip in place. I always put a clip on each side of the pins there. And same thing now, we can go ahead and clip in between all of the registration marks. Now for each one of the sides, you just want to ease the side of the pocket in with the side of the gusset. I always like to curve things around my fingers to get them in place, and then I go ahead and clip. Then I do the same thing on this side. Set it in there. Curve everything around your fingers and then clip. And then just go ahead and check it. Make sure that everything looks like it's seated in there nicely. This is the top side right here. And then I also like to check the gusset side, I want to make sure that my binding is laying nice and flat. After you have everything clipped into place, we're going to sew the pocket to the gusset from the gusset side with a 3/8 inch seam. The last thing that I like to do after clipping everything into place is to put a couple of staples on each side of the pin where the seam line is. So that would be points number 1, 3, 4, and 6. And I just use my little Tim Holtz craft stapler to do that. Make sure that you stay outside of your seam line. So you want the staples within the seam allowance. And then I just put my clips back in place. I'm sewing with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and a stitch length of 3.0, and you just want to go nice and slow. You can back stitch here if you want to. Try and keep all of your edges nice and even. And when you get back to where you started, just backstitch. After sewing your front pocket in place, just check the seam line all the way around. Make sure that you caught all of your layers. Check it from both sides. And once everything looks good, go ahead and trim that seam down to about 1/4 of an inch. Careful not to cut your binding when you're trimming. After trimming, make sure that all of your staples have been removed. If you use staples, then you can take your binding and fold it over to the lining side and clip in place. And then you can go ahead and either sew this down by machine or hand stitch it. I always prefer hand stitching. Here's the binding clipped into place, and as I said, be careful not to cut into your binding, and I did right over here. It's not too terrible. I'm just going to leave it as it is. In this step, we are going to prepare our strap connectors. So you need the 4 pieces for the strap connectors plus your webbing. From your length of webbing, you want to cut one piece that's 6 inches long, and then you want to attach that to one of the strap anchors that does not have the fusible fleece on it. And you'll just center it right here on the top and clip it in place. And then you're going to pair that up with one of the connectors that has the fusible fleece on the back. So you'll clip the 2 pieces right sides together with the webbing sandwiched in between. And then with the second strap connector, you're going to take the whole length of your webbing and clip it to the connector, center it on the top again just like that, and then you'll take the piece that has the fusible fleece on it, place the 2 pieces right sides together with the webbing sandwiched in between. Once you have everything clipped together, we're going to sew around the 3 sides with a 3/8 inch seam and a seam allowance of 2.6. I am going to do that off camera. You want to leave this bottom section here open. I did reinforce the area where the webbing is just by backstitching over it a few times. After sewing, trim down the seam to about 1/4 of an inch, but do not cut the area where the webbing is. So just like this. And then you can go ahead and turn it right side out. It helps if you pull on the webbing a little bit to coax it out. Then you can use a point turner to help you gently push out those seams. Then you'll go ahead and give this a good pressing, and then top stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the edge around the 3 sides, and do not sew over this area here. You want to keep that open. And I will do that off camera, and I will use a stitch length of 3.0. And you'll finish your second strap connector in exactly the same way. In this step, we will sew the keychain strap and the D-ring tab. So you need the piece that you've cut for your keychain strap and the D-ring tab. Then you need your 2 D-rings and your swivel clip. Turn both pieces so that they're wrong side facing up, and draw a line straight down the length of the center of both pieces. Then you'll take your iron and you want to press the raw edges up to the center line. And you'll do this on both of those pieces. Now fold both pieces in half so that the two folded edges right here are together, and press. Now for the D-ring tab, we just want to top stitch 1/8 of an inch along each edge, and I'm going to do that with a stitch length of 3.0, and I will do that off camera. After top stitching the D-ring tab, just slip the ring on and then baste across the short raw edge. Then for the keychain strap, open it up and fold it so that the right sides are together, and put a clip in the short ends. Then sew each short end with a 1/4 inch seam and a stitch length of 2.0, and I will do that off camera. After sewing the side seams, we want to cut a little wedge out of the top of each end of the strip. You want your cut to be above this fold line right here. So I'm just going to take a small clip on each side. And then we're going to fold this back with wrong sides together. And then we're going to refold the entire piece back in half. I'm going to clip it together. And then the ends, you can tuck in the ends here so that everything is nice and neat and everything is refolded as it should be. And then after you have everything looking nice and neat, you're going to top stitch all around the four sides 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, and I will do that off camera. Now slip a D-ring on one end and clip in place. Then add your swivel clip on the other end and clip in place. Then sew across each end. I like to backstitch over it a few times to make everything nice and secure. And I will do that off camera with a stitch length of 3.0. In this step, we're going to sew the interior back lining. You'll need the piece for your center back pocket, the two side panels, and your D-ring. We want to start with the center back pocket. You want to place it wrong sides up on your work surface. Now there is a specific top and bottom I have my top right here, and you want to refer to your pattern piece to make sure that you have your piece oriented correctly on your work surface. The first thing that you want to do is draw a line straight down the center of the piece, and that will be 3 7/8 inches from each side edge. Then up from the bottom center point right here, you're going to draw a line 1 inch up from the bottom. So you want to measure though from this center point. And then from this line here, you're going to measure up another 9 inches. And having that center point is going to help you line up your ruler. So if you place your ruler down right here, I have my 1 inch mark lined up with the very bottom center, and then this line right up here is in line with my center point, and then I can go ahead and draw my line straight across. Then you're going to take your piece and you want to fold on this line here that was drawn 9 inches up from that bottom line. And you're going to press that in place. Make sure that your side edges are even. And then you're going to take the piece, and where you ironed that fold, you're going to bring that down to the line that you drew 1 inch up from the bottom. And then you're going to press in place. You can go ahead and press it from the front side. Next, you'll take your D-ring and place it right above the fold of the pocket, and I like to have the end of the tab trailing about 1/2 inch off from the side here. You'll baste that in place, and then you're going to top stitch across the top of the pocket here, and of course you're only top stitching where the fold is. You do not want to top stitch through the entire piece. After top stitching along the folded edge of the pocket, we're going to add in our side panels. So you just want to place them right sides together and clip in place. Keep all of your edges nice and even. After clipping, we'll sew each side seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. I'm sewing with a stitch length of 3.0, and my seam allowances are 3/8 of an inch, and you do want a back stitch at both ends. Then you can flip over to the other side and sew your other panel in. In the area where your D-ring is, and mine is right here, you can sew over that spot a few times just to give it some extra strength. And back stitch at the end. will have a little piece of that D-ring sticking off of your seam. So you want to clip that off. Just clip it even with the edge of the fabric. And then iron your seams open, which I've already done. Now we're going to top stitch down each side seam here about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. I also like to leave a space for a pen, so I've marked a line here that's 1.5 inches out from this edge. So from this edge here, 1.5 inches, and then we will stitch down on this line too for a pen holder. So I'll start by top stitching 1/8 of an inch from the edge here with a stitch length of 3.0, and you do want to back stitch at each end. Then flip over, top stitch the other side. And now I'm going to top stitch on the line for my little pen holder, and you want to back stitch really well at both the top and bottom of the line. And you only need to top stitch towards the end of the pocket, so I can feel that the end of the pocket is here. You can see underneath right here where this fold is, that's the end of the pocket. So I'm just going to go that far and backstitch. In this step, we're going to baste our exterior back to our back lining. So you need the exterior back along with its corresponding piece of foam and the lining, the back lining that you just created. I'm going to place the exterior wrong side up on the work surface and apply a few pieces of double-sided adhesive tape, and then remove the release paper, and then center your foam on the back. And you want to have equal space all the way around the foam. And just adhere it down. Then you'll take your lining piece, lay it on top of the foam so you have the wrong side of the lining against the wrong side of the exterior. So here's the right side, this is the wrong side. And we're going to clip these pieces together, match up your center points on the top and the bottom of both pieces, and clip all the way around. After clipping the layers together, we're going to baste around the perimeter 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I'm basting 1/8 of an inch away from the edge with a stitch length of 3.0. In this step, we're going to baste our strap connectors onto the exterior back. So I have my back and my two connectors. We're simply going to take the connector and center it along the straight top edge here, and then clip in place. And I like my shorter piece of webbing to be on the right side of the back. After clipping them both in place, baste 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I'm going to do that off camera with a stitch length of 3.0, and I would go over this a few times. I would backstitch over them a few times just to give them some extra strength. In this step, we will sew the back of the bag to the back of the gusset. The first thing that you want to do is find the center of both your top and bottom gusset, and you can use your pattern pieces to help you find the centers, or you can fold in half. So here I have a pin marking the top center and a pin marking the bottom center. Then you'll mark your exterior back in the same way, and I've already marked mine, and you can see the markings indicated by the pins. Next, you want to open your zipper completely. And then you'll take the exterior back and place it right sides together with the back of the gusset. So you can see they are right sides together, exterior sides together, and the first thing that you'll do is match up the points where the pins are in the centers. And again, I like to put a pin on both sides. And the same thing on the bottom. Match up your center points and put in a couple of clips. Then we're simply going to clip all the way around just by following the contour of the bag. And you want to make sure that all of your edges are nice and even. Use as many clips as you need to use. And if it's easier for you to clip from the gusset side, that's fine too. Do whatever is comfortable for you. Just want to follow the contour. And keep those edges even. So this is what it should look like from the gusset side. This is what it looks like from the lining side. And we're going to sew all around the perimeter with a 3/8 inch seam and a stitch length of 3.0. And I'm actually going to reverse my clips because I am going to be sewing from the gusset side. And here's what everything looks like after I went ahead and reversed my clips. My seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch and my stitch length is 3.0, and I will back stitch. And we're just going to sew all the way around from the gusset side. Make sure that your edges stay nice and even with each other and just take it slow. You can see that I am using an edge guide here. I just repositioned my edge guide to make it stay in place. I'm coming to the area where my strap connectors are, so that will be some extra bulk there. Now I'm sewing over my second strap connector. And when I get back to where I started, I will just stitch over some of those previous stitches and backstitch. After sewing, you want to very carefully check your seam from both sides. Make sure everything looks good. I also like to reach in, see that everything feels okay to me. And once you're sure that everything is good, you want to trim down that seam allowance to about 1/4 of an inch, just like you did for the front. So I'm going to trim down. You want to be careful not to cut into your binding. And if you're more comfortable cutting from your binding side, you can do that too. So just go ahead and trim all the way around. After trimming, you're going to take your binding, just like you did for the front, and fold it over to the back and clip in place. And then you will either sew this by hand, which is my preference, or by machine. If I sew this down by machine, which I rarely do, what I like to do is just put a little bit of glue right above the seam line there and clip it, and I let the glue dry, and then after the glue dries I will turn it to this side of the gusset, to the lining side, and then I'll stitch right in the ditch. So this would be the ditch right here. You would stitch right here, and you want to make sure that this folded edge is below that seam line. And here's the binding all clipped into place. You can see it from both sides. And now I can go ahead and hand stitch it in place, and then we can turn the bag right side out. My binding is sewn into place, so now I can turn the bag right side out. I'll just go ahead and grab inside and pull. And then you just want to get in there and push out all of your rounded edges. Get everything to look nice and neat. The last thing for us to do is to attach the buckle and the strap slider. I'm going to start with the longer strap, and I'm going to put the strap slider on. You want to go from underneath and pull the strap up. Then you want to go over the center bar and push the strap back down. Just like this. Next I'll take my buckle, and I'm going to put the larger half of the buckle onto the end of the strap here. So once again, I want to go up through the bottom, and then over that middle bar and down. So it will look just like this. Then I'm going to pull this through, and I want to go back over to where my strap slider is. I'll push this up, I'll push the webbing up, and I want to take the end of the strap and I want to go back up through the bottom of the slider again. So that it looks like this, and then we'll go back down over the bar one more time. So now it should look like this. And then I'll take the end of the strap here, I'll clip it in place, and then I'll sew straight across the end of that strap right here, and I will stitch over it a few times. Then I'll take my shorter strap and the other half of the buckle. I'm going to go up from the bottom again and over the middle bar and pull it through, and once again I will sew down the end of the strap here, and I will stitch over that a few times. And when you install your strap slider and your buckle, you want to make sure that the strap is not twisted before you sew your ends down. And here's the bag all completed. I did go ahead and stitch down the ends of the webbing. I used a stitch length of 3.0 and I went over the stitching about 3 or 4 times. Well, I do hope that you've enjoyed watching this video. I hope that you'll give the pattern a try. I want to thank everyone who has supported me by liking my videos and subscribing to my channel. If you're not already a subscriber, I would love to have you as one. And I would also like to see you over at my Facebook group, which is Rosie and David Patterns. Thank you for watching.